Hi, and welcome to the inaugural podcast of Anyone's Game, the sport podcast that gives 110%, that's 10% fact and 100% opinion and conjecture. That's the end of the cliches, we promise.
Let's get to the headlines, and this week saw the conclusion of the spot-fixing trial with 3 Pakistani cricketers and an agent jailed for corruption. We'll talk about the case and the possible implications for gambling in cricket and other sports.
Other cheery news, the Met Police has launched its investigation into John Terry's alleged racist remarks, Anton Ferdinand. We'll see where the latest JC saga is.
And in rugby, Martin Thomas steps down as acting CEO as the RFU seeks to rebuild its image. We'll have a look at where the organisation might go next and the continued uncertainty over manager Martin Johnson.
And with only a 3-digit number of days left for the Olympics, we'll get the latest on sport, including the return of the Thorpedo. So this week saw 3 Pakistani cricketers, all sentenced in Southwark County Court. County Court?
Crown Court.
Crown Court, okay.
Come on now.
Media law.
Let's get that media law knowledge going.
It was all for something called spot fixing.
Yeah. Essentially, the allegations against them, which have presumably now been proved, is that the 3 bowlers in question, Mohammad Asif and Salman Butt, who were actually on trial, and Mohammad Amir, who it emerged had admitted his guilt 2 weeks before the trial, so he wasn't actually standing trial with the other 2, had all bowled no balls to order so that people could bet on them bowling no balls and make money. And the man responsible for organising that was a guy called Mazhar Majid, who was a sports agent who was also sentenced. Majid sentenced to 2 years, 8 months in jail. Salman Butt, obviously the former Pakistan captain, to 2.5 years. Mohammad Asif to 1 year, and Mohammad Amir to 6 months, which he'll actually serve in the Young Offenders Institute, it turns out, although he was 19 at the time of the offence, so not quite sure how that works. But anyway, let's not get into the legal technicalities.
This is the first time that these anti-corruption sport laws have been used. So the first time they've been sentenced.
Yeah, this is the first time anyone's been convicted under the Gambling Act 2005. And therefore, it's probably not too surprising that I think all of them are planning to appeal the sentences, because just kind of testing out the new legislation and seeing whether the sentences will eventually come down.
I mean, they're first for the sentences, and it was the first ball which was kind of pretty obvious that something was up when the commentators spotted it.
Exactly, the commentators at the time, this was the test match against England at Lord's last summer when Pakistan were touring. It was actually remarked on by the commentators at the time that it was a pretty huge no ball, I mean by a pretty huge margin, which is quite unusual. Obviously bowlers take a lot of time calculating their run-ups to try and make sure they get it absolutely spot on, so it was pretty unusual at the time, and obviously it turns out that that's because it was done deliberately and to order. So yeah, it's interesting. There's been quite a lot of speculation since the verdict and since the sentences particularly were announced about where this might leave cricket, particularly Pakistani cricket, but also gambling in cricket. Some people suggesting that this could be some kind of turning point. I have to say I'm pretty sceptical about that argument, simply because the only reason this case actually was brought at all was because there happened to be an undercover journalist involved. It wasn't because of the Mazhar Mahmood. It wasn't the ICC's anti-corruption unit that caught this. It was an undercover tabloid journalist. And obviously that's a pretty rare investigation, and it took a lot of evidence, taped phone calls, video footage, email records, phone records. I was actually in court for a couple of hours watching this case, and just the sheer volume of evidence that they had to go through to convict these guys makes it seem like this is going to be a fairly rare occurrence.
Yeah, of course, the News of the World is all was quite skilled with all of these kind of underhand tactics.
Undercover investigative journalism. This was their famous fake sheikh, of course, Mazhar Mahmood, who actually conducted the investigation. But with the demise of the News of the World and kind of lack of funds and lack of support for investigative journalism in general, it's doubtful how many more of these kind of large-scale sporting corruption revelations we're likely to see.
And on the plus side, though, I mean, it's probably brought the subject into the spotlight, especially the British press. Like, it's not something we would associate with British sport, although recently with Wayne Rooney's father implicated in a match fixing north of the border, it might be something we see a bit more of. But I mean, in terms of the wider world, I mean, Italian football is well known for match fixing, and Pakistani cricket, Indian cricket.
Yes.
lots of money involved with both of those leagues.
Greek football as well.
Greek football.
Scandal.
There's no money there
last couple of years.
to
Well, not anymore, but no, there used to be. No, it's very true. It's something that we probably don't see highlighted enough in the British press. I guess gambling fraud is a fairly recent development, or this kind of offence, just because of the development of gambling, and particularly things like in-play markets, which make it very difficult to track what people are betting on, and obviously people can time their bets very carefully, and I guess it makes it much more difficult to detect suspicious betting patterns. So it's there is speculation about just how big the illegal gambling industry is.
I mean, there could be retrospective cases brought on matches that have gone on previously, and we just assumed there was some awful bowling by England players. I'm thinking of Steve Harmison at the start of the Ashes in Australia, for one example. But yeah, I think there's probably a few cricketers, maybe the English leagues, will be quite uncomfortable at the moment if they have been involved or offered something like this.
Well, exactly. I mean, I know there's been some speculation about the IPL as well, the Indian Premier League, and whether there might be something to investigate there, because obviously that's where the real money is in cricket. It's a big money league, and a lot of gambling goes on as well for pretty big money. So we'll have to wait and see. But I guess cheating of various forms in sport is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. It's taken different forms over the years. We've had drug scandals. Just this week, of course, it's been revealed that 2 athletes failed doping tests at the World Championships in Daegu over the summer. But this is an issue that's been around a long time, and it's good that it's being highlighted. But we have to be very careful with these kind of issues, because obviously a big part of the reason that people watch sport and enjoy it is because it's unpredictable and because they're sure that it's authentic. And if that's lost, then I think it's competitive sport is going to lose a big part of its appeal. The public in general, need to be convinced that enough is being done, so that they can still rely on the authenticity of what they're watching.
I mean, Andrew Strauss came out today and fired a broadside at the ICC. That's a cricket sponsor related pun there. He called the anti-corruption body a toothless tiger, so it's probably arriving in the PCC and everyone's least favourite regulatory body.
Absolutely.
We'll do a top 5 in another podcast.
Stick around for that one. I think it's true. I think there's been broad agreement over this case that the ICC's anti-corruption unit was very slow to act, and that this case probably would never have come to light at all if it had been left up to the ICC. So there's a lot of work to do, in cricket particularly, but I think in all sport, to convince people that the authorities are dealing with issues of corruption and cheating in general, and that they're getting on top of it. I think there's still a long way to go on that.
Should we move on to something else that's unpredictable, the ongoing John Terry saga?
Ah, yes.
As a Chelsea fan, really close to my heart.
A Manchester-based Chelsea fan. That's unusual.
Yeah.
Don't get that combination a lot.
So, I mean, it's going on. The latest issue now is we're coming up to England friendlies next weekend and the week after against Spain and Sweden. So, obviously, people are concerned whether John Terry will be captain, whether he'll be even in the squad.
That's right.
After last week's football, I'd probably argue he doesn't deserve to be on the squad in pure football terms.
Yes, that Arsenal game was quite something, I have to say.
But he's not just fallen down on the field, he seems to have kind of fallen down morally off it as well.
Yes, of course, that Met Police investigation is ongoing into alleged racist remarks that he made to QPR's Anton Ferdinand 2 weekends ago now, so it's a long-running story, this one, and the latest development, as you say, he's been named in the preliminary England squad for the 2 friendlies against Spain and Sweden, but we don't know yet whether he'll make the final cut, and, of course, whether he'll captain the team, which is a major issue. Of course, after Fabio Capello removed him from the captaincy previously for his off-field antics with a fellow teammate's girlfriend.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how Capello reacts to this one.
There's a debate back then about the whole question of should private off-field behaviour be involved in the choosing of an England captain. I think most people came down on the side that it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, Wayne Bridge eventually just copped out and the didn't really come to a head. But this time it's probably the case that if he is in...
Yes. Well, I think this is an issue that very obviously has a major impact on his on-field conduct. The fact that it happened on the pitch and was whatever he did say or didn't say was directed at at a fellow player. And this is an issue that football has struggled with for a long time, the race issue and racism. Of course, you have the Kick It Out campaign that kind of comes around every year and tries to raise awareness and eradicate it once and for all. But I think that this is an issue that football's been dealing with for a long time, and one that much more obviously affects his standing on the pitch as well as off it.
Yeah, interesting enough, I mean, Anton's brother Rio is also in the preliminary squad. I mean, he's got injury problems of his own. His form's not great either, but quite interesting if they were in the same squad together, and if something has gone on. I mean, QPR owner, I saw this morning, Terry Fernandez has come out and said that he doesn't think John Terry is actually racist. He says, to quote him exactly, there's no hard evidence either way. I mean, Anton Ferdinand's been quite quiet through all this. We don't really know.
No, we haven't had any official comment from him, which is quite unusual. I mean, of course, we had the row earlier on in the season with Patrice Evra and Luis Suarez, which is still rumbling on as well. And both players were pretty vocal in that situation, which is more usual. You have one very keen to make the accusations and take them further, and the other defending themselves very strongly. And we've had that defence from John Terry, but so far we've yet to hear from Anton Ferdinand, which, given that he's the kind of alleged victim here, you would think he'd be quite keen to speak out. There was a picture from the papers this week with his anti-racism T-shirt, the Kick It Out campaign T-shirt on while training, and that's been interpreted by some as a bit of a statement on this issue. But we have yet to hear anything from him officially. But yeah, with those England games coming up, it'll be interesting to see whether this has any effect on the team, particularly John Terry's selection or otherwise. It'll be interesting to see what Capello does and how the rest of the squad reacts.
It's Capello's last year in charge, probably, hopefully.
Depending on your view. But yeah, his contract is up next year after the European Championship. So it's
sort of relief news this week with Harry Redknapp, who was one of 2 football-related people to have heart surgery for a minor heart defect. He's fine now. His side did lose 1-0 to Rubin Kazan. But he was probably the favourite in the press and the public's mind for the England job. I mean, does the fact he has a heart defect somehow
I don't know.
take away from his?
I'm not sure it would have an effect. He's a guy who's been around a long time in the English game. He's very widely respected, and of course he's an Englishman, which there are certain sections of the press and the footballing world that have been calling for an Englishman in charge of England for a while. And
English steel.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're going to have an Englishman, he seems the number one choice. But he's been there or thereabouts for a long time. He's been mentioned a few times before, and it's never come to anything. So it'll be interesting to see next time around whether he does go for it. He's been quite open about the fact that he'd love to do the England job. And based on Tottenham's form over the past few seasons, it's hard to see, if you are going to have an Englishman in charge, who would do a better job than him.
The other player who had sort of a heart scare was Antonio Cassano, the Italian player who also plays for AC Milan. He was admitted to hospital after getting off a plane and fainting. Turned out he also had a heart defect as well. He's also fine now, but he's out for 4 to 6 months. In terms of other kind of big news, headline hitting injuries, Andy Murray affected by something which probably affected us all at some point, a strain to the gluteal muscles. Yeah. He's out from Basel.
I had to pull out of the Basel, or Basel,
Basel,
however you pronounce it. I'm going to go with Basel. The Swiss Indoor Championships. It's a shame for Andy Murray because his form's really been picking up over recent sort of weeks and months. He had a pretty poor start to the year, it's fair to say, I think, but he was really, getting into his stride. He'd won 2 tournaments out in the Far East, 2 in a row, which is, pretty good going for him. He was consistently up there with the best of them. And so it's a pretty unwelcome interruption for him. But let's hope it sorts itself out quickly and he can be back. I don't know what it means for his chances in the ATP Tour finals, which of course are coming up later this month. We'll have to wait and see whether he makes an appearance and whether it affects him.
I think, like in tennis, Andy Murray's getting to the age now where he probably should be starting to choose the tournaments he participates in. Certainly what people like Nadal and Federer do. But I don't know, I get the impression that he feels he needs to compete in these because every semi-final he reaches, every final he reaches in the majors and doesn't win, it's a blow to his confidence. He needs a process, a winning streak to build up, to win a few tournaments before he feels he can face the number ones in the big tournaments.
It's an interesting dilemma, I think, for all tennis players. And of course there was that controversy a few weeks ago where some of the players were apparently talking about striking over the
number of
the heavy schedule
tournaments
that they were having to deal with. But of course, it's difficult for the ATP because so many of these tournaments, the ATP don't own all the tournaments. They're all owned by, companies or individuals that sponsor them. And so the ATP can't just cancel a tournament without having to compensate the sponsor or owner of that tournament. So, it's a difficult business because the ATP's got to make money. But the players have got to have some time to recover. I mean, tennis is one of those sports where injuries are a pretty regular occurrence. And of course, if you're suffering with a lot of fatigue, that's only going to exacerbate the problem. So I think you're right. Players do have to be a bit discriminating about, choosing the tournaments that they want to play, and maybe the ones that either they need to come back from injury or build up confidence, or, the big ones where they really think they've got a shot. I mean, we've seen a lot of players struggling with injury problems. Nadal, of course, with his knees. Don't know how long those are going to hold out. I mean, these are people in their mid-20s, late 20s. You wouldn't normally expect to see kind of, strapped up and falling apart every few months or so. But it is a strain, and it is in all professional sports. As we were saying with football, on the inside as well as the more obvious
limbs.
Limbs and extremities.
As an aside, I'm always confused with the Champions League fixtures this week and the Wednesday and Thursday, Tuesday and Wednesday evenings. Lionel Messi, another hat-trick from him in the Champions League, but I do wonder why his coach, Pep Guardiola, plays him in these meaningless Champions League ties. They're already through the group. They're playing against opponents who aren't of the same calibre, and he still feels the need to give Messi 90 minutes. Sort of begs the question whether Barcelona are as good as we think they are without Messi, where he's really key to the side. They seem to have on paper enough of a squad to challenge.
Well, you would think so, especially in these kind of group stages where you haven't got the same sort of calibre of opposition. Honestly, I think it's probably partly Messi himself. I get the impression that, football is what he loves and he wants to do it as much as possible. It's got to be tough for a player if that's what you love doing, to kind of sit on the sidelines and watch. So it's probably a combination of maybe the coach not having the confidence to leave him out because he feels that the team needs him, and also the player, wanting to play as much as possible. It's a very difficult balance to strike as a player and as a coach, because you want to be out there as a player doing the best you can for your team, and as a coach you want to give your best players time, but also you don't want to expose them to unnecessary risk of injury.
And he's playing 2 matches a week at the moment, so maybe
it's got to take a toll. It's got to take a toll.
Messi's down as the favourite for the Ballon d'Or, the sort of world football.
No real surprises there, I don't think.
Yeah.
Is Wayne Rooney the only Englishman to make the shortlist again? Probably not a surprise.
No.
If you've watched any of the recent England performances, I say performances in the loosest possible sense of that term.
And we had some rugby awards this week as well.
That's right, yeah. IRB Player of the Year going to Thierry Dussois of France, who was the only Northern Hemisphere player to make the list. So not only no English players, but none from the entire half of the globe apart from him. But to be fair to him, he is an outstanding player and a great captain.
Scored a try in the final.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kept New Zealand worried until the last 6 minutes of the game.
Really did lead France incredibly well in that match. And throughout the tournament, actually, I mean, France were pretty poor for the vast majority of that tournament, but he really did carry them through. And apparently, according to a lot of gossip, effectively took on the coach's role after Marc Lièvremont, of course, the manager, had a pretty public falling out with most of his squad.
It's a very French thing to do.
Indeed, yeah. Just have to look back to South Africa in 2010. Spectacular breakdowns of relationships between managers and players seem to be a trademark of French World Cup performances. But fair play to them. They got to the final without having played particularly well all through the tournament, and saved up that one great performance for the final match, which made it incredibly tense, which World Cup finals should be. So fair play to them for that, and fully deserved for Dussois. I think it's always harder to stand out and be recognised when you're in a team that isn't performing consistently well, and so I think it's a great achievement for him.
Graham Henry, a worthy winner of the manager as well?
I think it would have been hard to give it to anyone else, in all honesty, just because of the kind of force that New Zealand have been in world rugby for consistently now for some years. and Graham Henry's been a big part of that. Of course, he's left New Zealand now. He's back on the jobs market.
Okay.
And some people's pick to take over from Martin Johnson if he does step down or is asked to go, which of course, sometime after the tournament now, we still don't know. Still a lot of uncertainty hanging around.
All the controversy around the RFU. I mean, the acting CEO has stood down, Martin Thomas. He stood down this week.
That's correct, yeah. He's after a board meeting on Wednesday, it was decided, I don't know who decided, whether it was him or the board, that it was time for him to go. I think there are rumours, BBC for one is reporting that a lot of the clubs were quite unhappy with Thomas's role and were planning to write to the board to demand that he be sacked if he didn't step down. So I think there was a fair amount of pressure there for him to go. And it's probably fair enough. I mean, he's been around for a long time and he's overseen a pretty spectacular collapse in the organisation of the RFU and of English rugby. So it's probably about time to go. But, of course, it'll be interesting to see how long it takes them to find a replacement. I mean, they've been without a permanent chief executive since John Steele, of course, was sacked earlier in the year over the controversy over the performance director's role. They've yet to find a performance director, of course. They're now also without a chairman. That was Martin Thomas's previous role before he stepped in as acting CEO. So a lot of job vacancies at the RFU.
Probably need some fresh blood from outside.
I think that's got to be done. I mean, I get the impression that it was a lot of the same guys had been around for a long time, and it really is time, I think, for a bit of a change now. To bring people in from the outside who've got the kind of expertise and aren't sort of tainted, I suppose is the word to use, by the kind of collapse and the pretty spectacular fashion of it that we've seen at the RFU recently.
As you say, there is a bit of a tension in rugby union between the clubs, the Guinness Premiership and the RFU, sort of competing for players during also over the scheduling as well. I mean, it's different to things like cricket where there's a central contract which the body will pick for the best players.
Yeah, or in English rugby at least. I think it's different in places like New Zealand. In English rugby, players are contracted by their clubs, and the England setup effectively has to negotiate with the clubs to take the players away for international windows. As I said, in some Southern Hemisphere countries like New Zealand, the players are centrally contracted, and that's also how it works, as you mentioned, with cricket in this country. But yes, in rugby, players are contracted primarily by their clubs, and then they have to be sort of prized away for international. So there is always a bit of a tension between the clubs and the England setup.
Before we forget, there was an IRB award for an English player.
Yes, Young Player of the Year going to George Ford, the England under-20s fly half. Sickeningly talented, just 18 years and 3 months old.
Yep.
The youngest ever winner of that award, I believe. And yeah, he is definitely one to watch for the next few years. He's got a few games under his belt for Leicester, mainly it has to be said, while their sort of senior World Cup players were away. But looked pretty impressive for such a young guy, and looks like he could be one to watch in a few years' time. Maybe come next World Cup even. He'll be 22 by the time the World Cup in England comes around. We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, we put him through his paces, but we're too busy making podcasts. So
well, exactly.
We'll just have to let him get on with it and see how he does.
Indeed, have to see how he develops. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, as we were saying, around England rugby. Not just the kind of bureaucracy at the RFU, but the squad and the management as well. With Martin Johnson's position still apparently up in the air. There was this famous sort of pronouncement that he had 14 days to decide whether he wanted to stay or go. That seems to have been quietly dropped.
Rapidly extended, yeah.
Yes, we're all still kind of in the dark about whether he's going to walk away or whether he'll be kind of gently pushed towards walking away, and if so, who'll replace him, or whether they're going to stick with him.
But yeah, I don't think it'd be likely he'll come out to defend himself that much, because during post-match commentary and most of the matches in the World Cup, he wasn't particularly positive about any of his team's performances. Labelled the unforced errors, the tally of errors that they consistently built up in all the matches as one of the problems, where they were dropping points, not converting tries, and that sort of performance does sort of stop with the manager and the head coach.
I think that's one of the things you have to say about Johnson, is that he is pretty honest and pretty sort of candid in his analysis of the team's performance, and he will be prepared to put his hands up and say, I'm the manager. Ultimately, it's my responsibility if the squad isn't performing. And I think that's quite refreshing in many ways in a manager that he will take that kind of responsibility. But there does come a point where you think, well, okay, yes, you are responsible. What are you going to do about it? It would be good to see a little bit more constructive comment, a bit more positive comment from him. But I mean, I guess, to be honest, there wasn't a huge amount to be positive about in that World Cup campaign, on the pitch and off.
In terms of internationals for Rugby League Day, there is a big one this weekend, England versus the, am I right in saying the favourites for the Four Nations Cup?
I think perhaps joint favourites. I think Australia and New Zealand are very much the two biggest teams, as indeed in rugby union. No major changes there. England, of course, had that big win over Wales in their last game, 42-4, which is a great result for them. But I think Australia will present an entirely different challenge, as indeed they have done in rugby union in recent years. Quite a lot of comparisons to be made there.
Bit of an odd make-up, the Four Nations, for randomly selected teams.
England, Wales, Australia and New Zealand. Yes, it's quite an odd one. But, it's a format that's been running for some years and seems to be a pretty successful one, albeit dominated largely by the two Southern Hemisphere teams.
Moving on to the Olympics now. There's a few topical news stories this week. The one which I like the most is this new kit. It looks quite good, the new Team GB kit. It's sort of royal blue, a bit like a Topshop shirt we were talking about. But it looks pretty good.
Yeah,
Gareth Bale sporting it well.
Yes, modelling it on the BBC News website. Very, very slim fitting, as you said, for Gareth. Yes, no, this is the Team GB football strip that's being revealed and causing a bit of controversy. The Welsh FA not happy that they weren't consulted before their players were used to model the kit. Of course, there's an ongoing dispute about the GB football team with the Welsh, Scottish and Northern Irish, I think, FAs still debating whether to allow their players to be part of the squad, which is likely to be largely modelled around the England under-23 team. Of course, there's the rule in Olympic football that I can't remember exactly how many, but certainly the majority of the players have to be under-23. So it's likely to be a fairly young team. Although David Beckham's also suggested that he would like to be part of the Olympic team, so that could push the average age up a little bit.
Definitely my first choice for an ageing right winger.
Oh yeah, well
I mean,
pull the crowds in.
Do you think that some of the national FAs are holding out for maybe quotas of players from each country rather than having it? It probably won't be dominated by England, but that is the danger.
Well, it's tricky, to be honest, because obviously when you're a coach and you're picking a squad, you want to pick the strongest squad that you can, and it just so happens that at the moment that probably consists largely of English players, because England are by some distance the strongest of the home nations teams. But that's not to say it'll be exclusively England. Of course it won't. I mean, Gareth Bale we mentioned and Aaron Ramsey, two of Wales's top players, have both said that they'd be interested in playing for the Olympic team. It's just a question of resolving that kind of ongoing dispute between the various football associations.
Yes.
And the Olympic football team will be much stronger if they can get that sorted out, and I'm sure it'll pull in more fans if they can see players from all four of the home nations representing their GB team.
Well, under the watchful and affectionate gaze of Stuart Pearce, the
yes.
Olympic manager.
Yeah, pretty good choice, I think. He's got a lot of experience with the England under-23s, and should be a sort of fairly calming influence on a lot of the younger players. So yeah, we shall watch this space on that one, I think, see what happens there.
Moving away from football onto swimming, we've got sort of the professional competitive return of the Thorpedo.
Ah yes,
Ian Thorpe.
Ian Thorpe, of course, 5 times Olympic gold medalist, has decided to get back into the pool and try and get into London 2012. And so yeah, he was competing in Shanghai today. Not an outstanding return, came 7th in the individual medley, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I think that was what it was.
56 seconds. I've no idea what that means in swimming terms.
I'm pretty sure I couldn't do it, but that's all I know. It's an interesting one, because he's been out swimming for 5 years now, I think, and has decided to make a competitive return to try and get back into the Olympics. So it'll be interesting to follow that story and see how he gets on.
Yeah, he seems to be quite enigmatic when pressed to what he thinks his chances are. He's not really... I doubt he's expecting gold with the likes of Michael Phelps out there, but he's probably he wouldn't be coming back unless he thought he could offer something to the tournament.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, he wouldn't have bothered. You wouldn't think anyway, putting in all those hours of training and getting back into competition if he didn't think he stood a decent chance. But yeah, always plays his cards quite close to his chest, Ian Thorpe. So I'm sure he'll be a big pull for spectators if nothing else come 2012.
Also in Olympics news, we've got the opening of the first time that the hockey pitches have been used, an odd colour scheme.
Yes, blue and pink. First time that combination has been used. They've been dubbed London Blue and London Pink officially. I wasn't aware that those colours existed, but apparently they now do. The Great Britain women's hockey team have been training on the pitches for the first time. I've got a bit of an interest in this story personally. I've got tickets to the Olympic hockey next year, so very excited about that one. It'll be interesting to see how the pitches are looking. I can't imagine blue and pink hockey pitches, I have to say.
No.
I have to wait and see what that one looks like.
As they say, the Olympics, 3 digits away
Yes.
in terms of days still.
Yeah, counting down.
In terms of this weekend, are there any fixtures in any sports which draw your eye?
Yeah, well, actually, I was having a look through the Premiership rugby fixtures, and there's a couple that stand out, all on Saturday. There's some pretty strong lineup of games. We've got Gloucester against Exeter, bit of a West Country derby going on there. That should be very exciting. I've got sort of links with both of those clubs. I live with flatmates who are Gloucester fans. They're Cheltenham boys originally, and then of course I've got a lot of family down in Devon. My grandparents live in Exeter, so a bit of divided loyalties going on there. But it should be an interesting one.
Don't know much about rugby. Is it a title decider for West Country or?
Emphasis on the cider rather than the title, I think. Gloucester have been on a decent run, but they lost to Saracens last weekend. I don't think they'll be troubling the leaders too much in this campaign. I think they'll be looking for a Heineken Cup spot, but other than that, I don't think they'll be title challengers. And Exeter got promoted into the Premiership just last season.
Very much the new team still.
Very much a new team, although performing really well and sort of solidly mid-table so far this season. They've been very impressive. So it should be a good game, but not a title contest, I don't think. Although the current leaders are in action this weekend, Harlequins, who have yet to lose a game this campaign. I think their 100% record is still intact. They'll be taking that into the match against Bath, which should be a good one. Bath have had a pretty variable campaign so far, but we'll see how that goes. And of course we've got Leicester, several times champions, although had a really poor start for the season. They were missing about half their squad at the World Cup, to be fair to them, but they've really picked up in recent weeks and they'll be taking on London Irish. So pretty packed weekend of rugby to look forward to. How about football and...
well, one match that definitely isn't a title decider, but could be interesting, is Wolves-Wigan. I think this could be either one or two of the teams which will be relegated this season. Wigan just can't seem to score a goal. Hopeless in front of goal. No real striking threat, apart from Hugo Rodallega, who doesn't really contribute that many. So it could be a relegation 6 points. The Wolves haven't played well either. So I think whichever team loses this is probably heading down.
Relegation battle seems to start earlier and earlier every season.
Yeah,
it could be a really interesting one. Of course, Premier League this season has been a pretty unpredictable affair so far. A really exciting season. Lots and lots of goals.
Especially at the top of the table.
Especially at the top, very much so, with those Champions League places still up for grabs for next season. So
Newcastle in sort of fourth place at the moment could be holding on for
at the moment. Yeah, absolutely.
But they're playing Everton this weekend, and I think it's probably one of the harder matches they've faced so far. So maybe we'll begin to see what they're actually like.
Absolutely, big test still to come for Newcastle. But yeah, no, it's been a very exciting week of sporting action, and another one to come, hopefully. Otherwise, we'll have nothing to talk about next Friday, and that would be awkward.
Yeah, we'll keep you updated then.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will be back next Friday. Another edition of Anyone's Game.
Anyone's Game.
Excellent. We will see you then.